The cabin sat deep in the woods, hidden from the world. It had been abandoned for years. At least, that's what they thought. When James and his friends planned a weekend getaway, they didn't expect the horrors waiting for them. The group of 6, James, Ruth, Idris, Adams, Naomi, and Letty, had been close since college. The trip was supposed to be fun, an escape from city life, but something about the cabin felt wrong. The moment they arrived, the air was thick with an eerie silence. The towering trees stood motionless, and there were no sounds of birds or rustling leaves. Letty, the most superstitious among them, shivered. "I don't like this place," she murmured. "Come on, Letty," Adams laughed. "It's just a cabin. Nothing's going to happen." But as they stepped inside, the air smelled of rot and something metallic. Naomi wrinkled her nose. "Ugh, what's that smell?" They searched the cabin, finding old furniture, broken windows, and deep scratches on the wooden floors. In the dim candlelight, James noticed something strange. Dark stains on the walls, not just stains, handprints. Then, Ruth screamed. They rushed to her, finding her standing in a small room, staring at a massive symbol carved into the wall. It looked ancient, filled with jagged lines and unfamiliar markings. "This place isn't abandoned," Idris muttered. "Something happened here." That night, they tried to shake off the unease. They lit a fire, played music, and drank, but the feeling never left. Then, at midnight, it started. A whisper. James sat up, heart pounding. He looked around. Everyone was asleep, but the whispering continued. It wasn't just in his head. It came from the walls. Then, bang! The front door slammed shut. Letty bolted upright, gasping. "Did you hear that?" Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed them whole. Then, a low growl came from the hallway. Naomi clutched Adams's arm. "What the hell was that?" Idris grabbed a flashlight and shined it toward the hall. The light revealed deep claw marks running along the wooden panels. "Guys," Ruth whispered, her voice shaking, "we need to leave." But the front door wouldn't budge. It was locked, from the outside. Then they saw it. A figure stood in the shadows, its head tilted unnaturally. Its eyes were hollow, but its mouth, it stretched impossibly wide. Blood dripped from its jagged teeth. Then, it charged. Screams filled the air. They ran, but it was too fast. It grabbed Letty first. She shrieked as its claws dug into her flesh, pulling her into the darkness. James turned to run, but slipped on something warm and sticky. Blood. Letty's blood. "Help me," she screamed, but the voice was cut off with a sickening snap. Then, silence. The 5 remaining friends bolted into a room and barricaded the door. "What the hell was that?" Adams gasped. "We're going to die," Naomi sobbed. James tried to keep calm. "Number, we need to find another way out." Idris pointed to the window. "We can jump." Ruth shook her head. "It's a 2-story drop. Better than staying here." They broke the window, but before they could climb out, the creature burst through the door. It started with an innocent weekend getaway. Last October, my friends and I decided to escape the city and spend a weekend in a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip. Just 4 of us, some good food, and nature's silence. We found the cabin on a rental website. The pictures looked cozy, and the price was unbelievably low. Too low, perhaps, but we didn't think much of it at the time. The drive there was uneventful. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of orange and red, and the winding roads were picturesque. By the time we arrived, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest. The cabin itself was old but charming, with a wraparound porch and a stone fireplace. But from the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. The first night, the air inside was damp and heavy, carrying a faint smell of mildew. The furniture was mismatched and worn, and the windows were covered with thick faded curtains that blocked out most of the light. Still, we laughed it off. What else could we expect from an old cabin in the middle of nowhere? That night, as we settled in, strange things began happening. It started small, a tapping sound on the windows that we brushed off as tree branches swaying in the wind. Then, as we sat around the fireplace, we heard footsteps upstairs. Did someone go upstairs? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Everyone shook their heads. The four of us exchanged nervous glances, but when we checked the second floor, it was empty. Later, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination, but then I heard it, a faint whispering. It was so quiet I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely there, coming from the walls. I didn't sleep much that night. The second day. The next morning, we tried to convince ourselves it was nothing. Old houses make noises, right? But the tension in the air was undeniable. Over breakfast, we joked about the ghosts of the cabin, but no one laughed for long. As the day went on, the uneasiness grew. My friend Sarah swore she saw someone standing in the woods just beyond the tree line. When we looked, there was no one there. Later, James, the bravest of our group, went down to the basement to grab some firewood. He came back pale and trembling. "There's something wrong down there," he said, his voice shaky. It felt like someone was watching me. We decided to check it out together. The basement was cold and damp, filled with old tools and broken furniture. In the corner, we found a strange symbol carved into the stone wall, a circle with jagged lines running through it. None of us could figure out what it meant, but it left us deeply unsettled. The final night. That night, everything escalated. It started with the whispers, louder this time and coming from all directions. Then the tapping returned. But it wasn't just on the windows. It was on the walls, the floors, the ceiling. We huddled together in the living room, terrified. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah screamed. That's when we heard it, a guttural, inhuman growl coming from the basement. It was followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, slowly ascending the stairs. We didn't wait to find out what it was. Grabbing our phones and car keys, we bolted out of the cabin, not even stopping to pack our things. As we ran to the car, I glanced back and froze. There was someone standing in the cabin window, watching us. It wasn't human. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its face was twisted into an unnatural, predatory grin. We drove back to the city in stunned silence. None of us could explain what we'd experienced, and none of us wanted to talk about it. A few days later, I tried to look up the cabin online to see if anyone else had reported strange experiences, but the listing was gone. It was as if it had never existed. To this day, I can't explain what happened that weekend. We never went back to the woods, and we rarely talk about that trip. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the whispers, and I wonder if whatever was in that cabin followed us home. Inside a metal coffin. The hotel room. Coffin, Japan. A woman was found sealed inside a metal coffin inside a hotel room, left to suffocate, and the case remains unsolved. In the summer of 1999, a cleaning crew at a small business hotel in Tokyo made a gruesome discovery that would leave both police and the public baffled for years. A woman's body was found inside a sealed metal coffin, placed in the middle of a rented room. No one knew how it got there, who had put it there, or most chillingly, why. Even in a city like Tokyo, known for its strange and sometimes sinister urban legends, this case stood out for its sheer mystery. The room had been locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry, and the metal coffin, large, airtight, and heavy, had no visible seams or openings. It was as if someone had placed it there and simply walked away, leaving behind a puzzle with no answers. The discovery: the room where the coffin was found had been booked under a fake name. Staff recalled that a man, who appeared to be in his late 40s, had checked in alone. He carried no visible luggage and paid in cash for several nights. Surveillance footage later showed that he entered the hotel but never left. Housekeeping had initially ignored the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, assuming the guest wanted privacy. But after 3 days of silence, with no one checking out or responding to knocks, the hotel staff used a master key to enter the room. What they found was deeply unsettling. The room was spotless. No signs of struggle, no disarray, no personal belongings. The only thing inside was the coffin. It was industrial-looking, smooth, and metallic, without handles or locks. A single breathing tube had been attached to the top, now useless. Inside the airtight container was the body of a woman. She was curled in a fetal position, her hands lightly clenched as if she had fought to hold on to the last breath of air. The cause of death was clear: asphyxiation. Who was the victim? The woman inside the coffin was later identified as a missing person, a woman in her 30s, who had been reported missing by her family a week earlier. She had no known connection to the hotel, and there was nothing in her background to suggest she would have been involved in anything criminal or dangerous. She was not a sex worker, nor did she have ties to the Yakuza, which police initially suspected. Her family described her as a quiet, responsible woman who worked in an office and rarely went out at night. There was no boyfriend, no apparent enemies, nothing that could explain why she had been murdered in such a bizarre fashion. Even stranger, the autopsy showed no signs of struggle or external injuries. No drugs, no alcohol in her system. It was as if she had been placed in the coffin alive, fully aware of her fate, and left to die. The impossible crime scene. For investigators, the biggest question was how the coffin got there in the first place. The room was on the 6th floor, and the elevator had no record of any large deliveries. The front desk saw no one carrying a massive object into the hotel. There were no hidden cameras, no prints, no DNA evidence. The security footage showed nothing except the man who checked in. If someone had managed to bring in such a large, heavy object, why wasn't it seen? And then there was the most unsettling detail. The room was locked from the inside. Theories and unanswered questions. The case left both police and true crime enthusiasts scrambling for explanations. The slow death theory. Some speculated that the woman had been forced inside the coffin before the man checked in. The breathing tube may have allowed her to survive for a short time before being sealed off completely. But how could she have been transported inside the hotel without anyone noticing? The inside job theory. Was someone within the hotel involved? If so, why leave such an elaborate and conspicuous crime scene instead of disposing of the body more discreetly? The suicide or ritual theory. Some suggested that the woman had willingly entered the coffin as part of a twisted suicide ritual. However, there was no history of mental illness, no note, and no indication she had planned her own death. The Yakuza or underground crime theory. Tokyo's underworld is known for bizarre and ritualistic killings, but why target an ordinary office worker? And why in such a theatrical way? The case goes cold. Despite a massive investigation, no suspect was ever found. The man who checked into the room, presumed to be the killer, was never identified. His name, fake. His ID, untraceable. The room key was left inside, and there was no record of him ever checking out. Over time, The hotel tried to scrub the story from its history, fearing the loss of business. Some claimed that the room was quietly closed off, turned into storage, or even permanently sealed. Others say that staff members, disturbed by the case, refused to clean the room, believing it was haunted. To this day, no one knows how the coffin got into the hotel, how the killer left, or why the victim was targeted. The hotel room coffin solved mystery remains one of Tokyo's most chilling and unexplained cases, one that raises more questions than answers. And perhaps the most disturbing thought of all, what if this wasn't the first time it happened? Jake had been driving for hours, and the long stretch of highway seemed to go on forever. He was on a solo road trip through the remote countryside, far from the bustle of the city. The sun had just begun to set, casting an orange glow across the sky. He had heard rumors of an old road that was never marked on maps, a place where travelers had gone missing, but he brushed it off as mere superstition. As the night began to fall, Jake noticed a narrow, almost hidden road leading off the main highway. The sign, barely visible in the dark, simply said, "No exit." He figured it was a shortcut to save time, so he decided to take the detour. The road seemed oddly quiet, with no other cars in sight. The headlights of his car illuminated the path ahead, but there was something strange about the air. It was thick, almost suffocating. As he drove further, the landscape around him began to change. The trees became more twisted, and the road narrowed, forcing Jake to slow down. The silence was overwhelming. His radio fizzed and crackled, picking up nothing but static. The further he went, the more uneasy he felt. But he pressed on, hoping to get back on track soon. Suddenly, the road ahead of him vanished. There was no warning, no sign of where the road had gone. Jake slammed on the brakes, his heart racing. The car screeched to a halt at the edge of an empty, dark abyss. The road was gone, leaving nothing but an endless expanse of night. He backed up the car quickly, trying to find a way out, but every direction he turned led him back to the same spot. No matter how many times he drove in circles, the road refused to appear again. A shadow crossed in front of his headlights, and Jake froze. A figure, barely visible in the fog, stood in the middle of the road, blocking his path. His hands trembled as he rolled down the window. The figure spoke in a hoarse whisper. "You shouldn't have come here. Now you'll never leave." Before Jake could react, the figure vanished, leaving only the sound of the wind. Jake's pulse raced as he looked around, his mind spinning. He was trapped on a road that shouldn't even exist. The car's engine sputtered, and the lights flickered, then went out completely. Jake was left in darkness, the weight of the eerie silence pressing in from all sides. As panic set in, Jake realized that he wasn't alone. The road had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him. No one would ever find him again. The town of Raven's Hollow had always harbored dark secrets, but none as sinister as the legend of the Cutting Head. It was whispered that a figure haunted the old Blackwood forest, wielding a rusted axe and claiming the heads of those who dared wander too far into the night. Skeptics dismissed it as folklore, but every few years, a new disappearance would renew the fear. Ethan Carter never believed in ghost stories. A journalist by trade, he thrived on exposing myths and uncovering the truth. When rumors of a fresh disappearance surfaced, this time a local hunter named Greg Miller, Ethan saw an opportunity for a compelling expose. He packed his camera, flashlight, and notebook and set off toward the dreaded forest. The entrance to Blackwood was a gaping maw of twisted trees, their skeletal branches reaching like fingers toward the sky. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the only sounds were the distant hoots of owls and the rustling of unseen creatures. Ethan ignored the chill creeping up his spine and ventured deeper. He followed the path Greg had taken, marked by torn bits of fabric and discarded cigarette butts. The deeper he went, the heavier the atmosphere became, as if the forest itself was aware of his presence. After an hour, he found something. Greg's backpack, slashed open, its contents strewn across the ground. Nearby, there were footprints and drag marks leading further into the trees. A sudden snap of a twig made Ethan whirl around. The beam of his flashlight trembled as it scanned the trees. Nothing, just the endless void of darkness between the trunks. Taking a deep breath, he pressed on. Then he saw it. A cabin, decrepit and leaning as if exhausted from standing for too many years. The windows were dark, the door slightly ajar. Ethan hesitated before stepping forward. The air here smelled of rot and old blood. He pushed the door open. The stench hit him first, a putrid mix of decay and iron. The room was dimly lit by the moon filtering through cracks in the wooden walls. And in the center of the room, lined up on a crude wooden table, were severed heads. Ethan's stomach lurched as he counted. 5, 6, 7. The last one was fresh, eyes still wide with terror. A floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, but it was too late. A shadow loomed from the darkness, a massive figure clad in tattered leather, its face obscured by a mask fashioned from stitched flesh. In its calloused hands gleamed a rusted axe, dripping with something dark. Ethan stumbled back, nearly knocking over the gruesome display. "Wait, I just wanted to know the truth." The figure cocked its head, as if considering. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged. Ethan dodged, but the axe grazed his arm, slicing through his jacket and drawing a burning line of pain. He crashed into the table, sending severed heads rolling to the floor. Heart hammering, he scrambled for his camera, raising it like a shield. The killer hesitated, as if confused by the flashing lens. Seizing the moment, Ethan bolted for the door. His legs pumped furiously as he tore through the forest, branches whipping at his face. Behind him, heavy footsteps pounded the earth, growing closer. The rustling turned into crashing, then silence. Had it stopped chasing him? Ethan dared a glance back and tripped. Pain exploded in his ribs as he hit the ground. He gasped, struggling to rise, but a weight pinned him down. Hot, rancid breath tickled his ear. A whisper. No one escapes the cutting head. The axe fell. The next morning, the townspeople of Raven's Hollow awoke to a gruesome sight at the town square. A fresh head had been placed atop the old stone fountain, eyes frozen in eternal terror. Ethan had found his truth, and he had become part of the legend.